Hello, Roberts Kindergarten. It's Miss Gass with this week's science investigation, and I am very excited about it, and you will soon see why. So remember last week when Mrs. Skiffington read us this book about the gift of the tree? And one of the things that we learned in this book is how when the tree died and eventually fell to the ground, there were certain creatures and organisms that worked to make the tree decompose and grow back into the earth. One of these organisms was fungi or mushrooms. They feed on the tree. And then there are some insects like centipedes that also feed on the tree. And the wood rots away until it turns back into soil. And all the nutrients from that the tree held go back into the soil to feed new plants. So this week we are going to be investigating how that happens, how natural materials decompose and get turned back into soil. And to help us with that investigation, we are going to be looking at a new class pet, or a bunch of new class pets. And this is why I'm excited. So we are going to be looking at a certain kind of worm called a red wriggler worm. And these worms are they work really hard to decompose materials. So what they do is they eat natural materials like food scraps or leaves, and they poop out rich, dark soil that is full of nutrients for plants to grow in. So let's take a closer look at our new friends, the red wrigglers. Are you ready? Okay, so what you see here is actually really rich soil where the red wrigglers have been hard at work eating some of the materials that I've given them, and they have created this dark, rich soil. See how it's almost black and it's very moist? Now, take a look. Do you see our new friends, the red wrigglers? Here's one right here. There's one over here. There's some twisted up over here. There we go. I am going to put a special attachment on my camera on my phone so we can take a closer look at them. Okay, so the first part of our science investigation is to observe the worms. So I'm using a special piece on my camera so that you can see it super close up. You can see how it moves. What do you notice about the worm's body? Ooh, look at the tip of it right there where it's moving. What do you think it's doing? What do you notice about the color? What do you notice about the shape, the markings? So this is an adult wriggler. Let's see if we can find a baby. Okay, here's a immature worm. So you could notice if the color is different, if the shape is different, if the markings are different. Does it move differently? Okay, now we've done the first part of our experiment. We've taken a close look and we've observed the worms, but right now they're not in their natural habitat. So what we're gonna do is we are going to make a home for them, and this is gonna be a home that we can use to observe them, and it's called a compost bin. So I'm gonna show you the different pieces of our compost bin. So It looks like this. It's a Tupperware container that you might store food in, except I have drilled in this Tupperware container holes so that air can get in for the worms. So there's holes in the bottom, and that's also so liquid can drain out because we don't want it to be too wet. And there's also holes in the lid. I am going to put a lid on it because we don't want our red wrigglers wriggling away, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to make a happy little habitat for our worms, and then we are going to put them inside and give them something to eat. And then we're going to observe what they do with it. So the first thing you need to make your habitat for your worms is something a lot of you guys probably have at home, newspaper, okay? So the worms are going to need a home where they can move through their habitat easily. And one of the ways we do that is with newspaper. So what you do is you tear it into thin strips like this, just like that. And then once you have those strips, they don't like their homes to be too dry. So it's kind of this balance. You don't want it too dry and you don't want it too wet. So what you do is you take your newspaper strips and you are going to get them wet. Okay, now they're too wet. I put this whole thing of water in. So what you're gonna do, and this is a little bit messy, but we all know Miss Guest loves to get messy, is you are going to take your newspaper out, it's all wet, and you're gonna wring it out. So you're gonna squeeze out all the excess water so that it's not too wet for our worms. Okay, but if I put it in like this, the worms wouldn't be able to really easily move through it. So before I put it into the bin, what I'm gonna wanna do is I'm gonna wanna break it up a little bit, okay? Like that. Make sure it's nice and loose in the bin. Okay. Now remember I said you don't want it too wet, but you don't want it too dry. So one of the materials that we put in to compost bins to help the worms is a material that they work through in nature out in the soil all the time, which is dried leaves. If you notice that after the leaves fall off the tree in the fall, they stay on the ground. And what they do is they decompose and they go back into the soil. So I'm gonna crush these up a little bit. Make it a little bit easier for our worms to digest. I'm gonna put a layer of leaves on top. Now my hands are really dirty. Okay, all right, nice layer of leaves on top. All right, I'm gonna give you a closer look at the bin. Okay, here it is so far. We've got the layer of leaves on top and the damp newspaper strips below. And now we need to give our worms some food. So what I've done is I've collected some materials. Some materials I'm pretty sure the worms are gonna like because they're natural materials that I think they're going to like to eat. And other materials are more of an experiment to see what happens and how long it takes them to decompose. So over here, we've got things like an eggshell. This is a part of a potato. Oops. Looks like it has Eli hair on it. Part of a potato. This is a plant that I pulled out of my garden, just a weed. We've got a leaf and a piece of banana peel. I didn't do a whole banana peel because our compost bin is small. And then these are some pieces of flowers that were cut. And then over on this side, we have some materials that I'm not so sure about. We've got some plastic wrap, a couple different kinds of plastic wrap, a rubber band, and a paper clip. and a piece of plastic from a salad thing. And then this one, I happen to know a little secret. I don't know if you guys can tell what that is. That is coffee, and I happen to know that worms think coffee grounds are delicious. So we're gonna put some of that in there too. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we are going to put our materials into the bin. Okay, it's a little bin. And then my eggshell, break that up a little bit. And some of the coffee. There we go. Okay, so now we have all of our materials, and it's time to introduce our worms to their new home. So I'm gonna put you guys down for a sec. Okay, it's time to put our worms into their new home, and then we can observe what they do when they go inside. Now, I'm using a chopstick right now, but you can absolutely touch worms with your hands. You just have to be gentle with them. My worms are in very wet soil, and so I wasn't crazy about, it's not the worms I don't want to touch, it's that wet soil. Okay, so let's take a look at what they're doing. Okay, here they are in their new home. So you see the worms in there. So here's one here. There's one over here. So they are in their new habitat. They're probably gonna take a little while to adjust. My worms seem to be sleepy. So look at what this guy's doing. He landed on that piece of bubble wrap. So let's see what he does. This guy over here seems to be digging his way down into the soil, into his new habitat. This one too. Let's see what he does. All right, so check out this worm over here. He's made his way off of the plastic wrap. Where do you think he is going? Okay, so he is also making his way down into the soil. Didn't like that plastic wrap so much, did he? Okay. Okay, so now that we've set up our compost bin, what I'm going to do, the last step is I'm going to put a piece of newspaper on top. So worms live underground. They live in the soil, and so they like places that are dark and cool and damp. So what we're going to try and do is make a environment that is as much like that natural environment as we can. So I'm putting a piece of newspaper on top, and I'm going to just give it a little spray just to keep it a little bit moist, not too dry. Okay, and then I'm going to put the lid on. And remember that there's holes in our compost bin, so the worms can breathe. They have plenty of air in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to give them some time to settle in, and then we're going to take a look at what they've been up to and do an observation and see if any of the materials that we put in have changed or decomposed, and what the worms are up to. So what I'd like you to do is do an observation of what we saw today, okay? So draw me the worm the worms that you saw, what you noticed about them, and what you noticed about the compost bin that we set up, what materials we put in. So you're drawing like a scientist and noticing like a scientist. So you want to pay close attention to what you saw and try to make your drawing look as much like that as possible. Okay? I hope you enjoyed our new friends as much as I did, and I can't wait to see what they get up to in our compost bin. So we'll do another check-in, just like we did with the garden. All right? Have fun, you guys.